our kids.
Good evening, everyone. Does this mic get a good volume for everyone in the room? Perfect. Good, excellent. Good evening. My name is Michelle DeMarzo. I'm the Curator of Education and Academic Engagement here at Fairfield University Art Museum. It's my pleasure to welcome you to what is officially our last event of the spring 2023 season. We could not be happier to be closing out with these two wonderful women, Kathleen Bennewitz and Ive Covaci, who are going to be speaking to us tonight about the women of the Westport public art collections. Many of you probably know exactly why we are asking them to speak about the women of the Westport. WestPAC, right? WestPAC tonight. If you have not yet seen it, our spring exhibition is called In Their Elements, Women Artists Across Media. It's in our Bellarmine Hall Gallery, it's just downstairs. It is closed right now, but will reopen tomorrow at 11 a.m. We're open Tuesday through Saturday, 11 a.m. to 4 p.m. The show is up through July 15th, so you have still some time. It is the first show in our museum's 13-year history to have been fully curated by an undergraduate student, Phoebe Charpentier, who actually just graduated, so we can now say she's a recent alumna curator. Almost all of the works are from our own collection, and we're very proud of the fact they're almost all recent acquisitions during our executive director, Carrie Weaver's tenure. But WestPAC stepped in to make it possible to make the show even richer by lending 7 works to Phoebe's exhibition. So we are deeply grateful to Kathy and to Ive for working with this talented student for making her show even richer than it would have been, and we're jealous of some of the works that we can't have in our permanent collection. I will just briefly introduce our 2 speakers and then let them take it away. Kathleen Bennewitz is Town and Westport Curator for WestPAC, as well as Executive Director of the Edward Hopper House Museum and Study Center in Nyack. She earned art history degrees from Princeton University and the University of Delaware. She's held curatorial positions at the Amy Carter Museum and Frederick R. Weissman Art Museum at the University of Minnesota, and in education at the Minneapolis Institute of Art. In Connecticut, she previously served as Director of Exhibitions and Programs at the Greenwich Historical and Fairfield Museum and History Center. So a lot of experience coming to WestPAC and Hopper House. And Fairfield's own Ive Covaci is Adjunct Professor in the Art History and Asian Studies programs here at Fairfield, where she's been teaching since 2010 after completing her PhD in Art History with a specialization in pre-modern Japanese music and Buddhist art at Yale University. She regularly teaches courses in Asian art history and a section of the Art History Global Introductory course, Exploring Art, and has curated several exhibitions for us, including Ink Stone on contemporary Chinese art in the spring of 2022, and Gifts of Gold Japanese lacquer boxes in the spring of 2020. And I should say, for all of our past exhibitions, you can go on our website and read the catalog. In the case of the 2020 show, such an extraordinary show, shut down by the pandemic. We didn't yet have our Matterport tours. We didn't have our fancy camera in 2020, but we do now. So if you wanted to see a show from last year but you didn't get here, there's a full VR tour on our website that you can get a sense at least of the show. You can peek through the catalog. So be sure to check out fairfield.edu/museum and visit our past shows. A resident of Westport, Ive is currently chair of the Westport Public Art Connections Committee. She's been a member since 2016, serving as education chair for the past few years. And I want to also mention that Ive was last in Bellarmine Hall to receive the Adjunct Faculty Member of the Year Award. That's nice speakers.
Thank you, Michelle. Thank you, Carrie. It's wonderful to see all of you here, see some friendly faces, as well as people new to us. But I want to also congratulate you all very much on the current exhibition. It's just really inspiring to know that that is the work of the senior. It's really wonderful. It says a lot about the program, our history department, and so. Congratulations on that. We are doing a little tag team song and dance for you on Westport. I'm actually going to be kind of setting up a context for how we kind of got to Westport Public Art Collections through our town's cultural journey, through our town's cultural past, with a focus on the women in it. Because it's been very interesting to look at the women residents in Westport and and really the impact they've had since the day they became residents as far back as that is the turn of the century, the last century. So by doing that, I think it will poise up and really help become a background and a springboard to understand why Westport was WestPAC was created, and the role of women within it as well. So in the late 1880s, American artists began seasonal sojourns to New York City, exploring the banks of Long Island Sound, as well as its tributaries, from Costco to Old Lyme, in search of locations to paint, and also to find camaraderie among like-minded creative souls. When painter and instructor Asa P. Linden arrived in 1911 from Chicago, a Bridgeport reporter said, quote, "There seems to be something in the air and scenery of this town which induces artists to settle within its limits." In the early 1900s, this was really a wave of progressive thinking artists and their families who began to arrive in Westport, buying or renting antique abodes and mixing freely with longtime farmers, shopkeepers, laborers, and professionals. Professional and business people were relocated right beside them. Some of the artists descended from families with ancestral ties. Others were recent immigrants or first-generation Americans. There was differences in education, wealth, and religion. As a Christian Science Monitor reported in 1913, collectively, they represented artists who, quote, belonged to New York, to Paris, to Munich, and Rome, and of the wider art world. Indeed, the convergence of their rich, diverse past through the arts gave shape to Westport, which is, for many of us, our hometown. Marine painter Neil Mitchell of New York City arrived earliest upon marrying Agnes Lewis of Westport in 1888. She was a poet. Among the first true cohorts were illustrators J. and Marquand in town by 1904, Edmund Ashe by 1905, sculptor H. Daniel Webster of the Minuteman in 1906, George Hand Wright and painter Lawrence Mazanovich in 1907, and illustrator turned modernist painter Arthur Dove in 1909. What is lacking in the reporting of this area and in the newspaper accounts, and until recently in Westport's own chronicling of its artistic community, is the role of the women and the women artists, many of whom were married to the men whose careers and whereabouts were being tracked by the art news outlets. Their given names, their faces, and identities, in many cases, are unknown. Learning about their roles, their education, their accolades and ambitions, or even finding their artwork takes Herculean detective work. More awaits to be revealed. By the way, these pen and ink drawings on the Pegasus image on the first slide and this one here are by James Dougherty, who is Jimmy the Ink. Unlike the painters of Old Lyme and Costco, Westport's artists did not constitute a colony at all, but they were a heterogeneous body, or to quote a newspaper from 1911, a coterie of artists doing missionary work in a village that hitherto has slept rather quietly on the wooded banks of the Saugatuck. Still, these artists regularly exhibited together at Silver Mine, and as we'll see at the Westport Library, the Bedford YMCA, and in the 1930s, many also worked in the federal WPA program. And they sold their wares, their output, their paintings, their prints, their watercolors at the Westport Artist Market on the Post Road. Their exhibits attracted press and buyers among residents and summer visitors motoring along the busy Post Road. And indeed, the cachet of Westport being truly an artist town was alive and well. And I think it was like, a Hollywood tour. instead of celebrity, they were celebrities and people knew where they lived and where they wanted to be themselves. All of these artists thoroughly enjoyed life in New York City, but they also looked forward to weekend and seasonal sojourns to Westport, where they were warmly welcomed into social circles by friends. Often such friend groups, and I really don't want to call them cliques because they weren't siloed, were oriented around places and schools that they had trained, from the art students living in New York, to the Pennsylvania Academy of the Fine Arts in Philadelphia, to the Chicago Art Institute, and the Kansas City Art Institute. As families, they saw a need in the place for the country away from the popular haunts of Greenwich Village, which, to quote James Dougherty, was no place to grow for growing youngsters. The village offered attractive coastal views together with this congenial and professionally connected community. In 1931, the Boston Evening Transcript described the scene. In Westport, an investigator finds an extensive permanent colony of painters, etchers, sculptors, typographers, and printers of 20 years, and had established himself in the fabric of the town. A very attractive social structure of sort has accumulated, so that Saturday evenings year-round are jolly indeed. They are friends, they are people, they fish and skate and ride and sail sloops and swim and have children, and they gossip. Dear me, how they gossip. They are as easily friendly as any group you can imagine. In 1926, a Hartford Current reporter wrote that there were over 80 known artists bringing their books and easels with them that now found Westport an ideal place for working and living. Numbering among them were national academicians, gold medal sculptors, mural decorators, portrait painters, and the highest paid advertising writers in the world. This post-World War I wave included magazine publishers, authors, playwrights, actors, producers, and musicians, all of which have helped secure Westport's growing reputation as a thriving creative community. While this 80-person list was not itemized, in 1925, the year prior, the town crier published short biographical accounts of almost 70 artists that were working in Westport at the time. Of these, 18 are women, and 6 were in 2 artist marriages. Sophia T. Balcom was Mrs. Tony Balcom, Ellen Heath was Mrs. Howard Heath, Maria Abrams Lawson was married to Robert Lawson, Elsie Fuhrer was married to Ernest Fuhrer, and she actually studied with Alfred Maurer and Arthur Dove. Laura Gardner, who we'll be talking about in a few minutes, was married to James Earl Fraser, and Maria Patton Waldron was an illustrator and married to editor and editorial writer Webb Waldron. The most successful and famous of all these, men included, was Rose O'Neill, who you see on the right, a pioneering women illustrator, the first female illustrator for Puck magazine, who made her fortune eventually with her Cubie doll creation and franchise, and settled here on a large estate on the Saugatuck. The women not listed here, but fervently involved in the Westport art scene, was Anne Holden Mazanovich, who you see here in the center. She was a writer and a playwright, and a daughter of Amber, who was like Oprah, who was a pioneering female columnist, national columnist, but she was also the fulcrum of Chicago's Bohemian Society. When Anne and her husband, after spending time in France, made Westport home in 1907, she also was a strident suffragist and founded the Equal Franchise League, and spurred on fellow wives of artists in the votes for women. But she also was responsible for the exhibitions that we will be talking about just a minute. Many of the earliest arrivals were household names at the time. They were these people knew Mazanovich, they knew Ossip Lynn, they knew Hugo Balin, they knew Silas Dustin, they knew Joseph Mortimer Wittenauer. These names are lost to us today. They haven't really stayed current. Author Dove, we know. And so if it's hard to do research on the men, just imagine how hard it is to do the research on these women. So as part of the artist community were husband and wife power couples like Lila Wheelock and Oscar Howard. Lila Wheelock is seen in the center with in a portrait by Ralph Boyer. And Oscar Howard's pen and ink drawing, I'll Fight for That Song, is in the WestPAC collection. She had studied at the Art Student League under James Earl Fraser, and had spent prior summers at the Pascal Colony, where Rose O'Neill had also stayed. In 1919, she was a sculptor, and her husband an illustrator. They bought property on Coleytown Road from the Frasers. This large swath of land eventually became the home of Paul Newman and Joanne Woodward. Rebecca Hunt Boyer, who's on the left, came to Westport via Philadelphia, where she had studied at the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts with her husband Ralph. After their daughter was born in Greenwich Village, they moved to Westport for family life. For over 40 years, she pushed aside her art, as did many of the two women in two artist marriages, to be a mother and housewife. After Ralph's death, she picked up her brush again and would go on painting excursions with her daughter, Becky, who was a successful artist in her own right and became the first woman to have a cover of Reader's Digest. We are very lucky in the WestPAC collection to have many of several examples of Rebecca Hunt Boyer's watercolors from her late life. And this this graphite drawing of her in a colonial revival costume was by Kurt Beebe. There were all kinds of costume parties and things that they did, and it was quite the scene. But interestingly, emphasis on home life is also about women artists like Nancy Fay, who was a very well-known illustrator. She was married to Clark Fay, but in this case, her story is told through home life as opposed to a professional setting. In this article from 1925 from the Town Crier, it describes that Clark left promptly each morning for a studio, which is only located 100 feet away, while her studio was inside the house. There she was managing 3 children and the household. However, she made drawings as easily as falling off the horse through herself. In 1911, 112 years ago today, the Westport Library held the town's first art exhibit for Westport-based artists. This opening local headlines championed art has struck Westport with a definite, emphatic, and beneficent force. One of the works shown that year was author Dove's landmark postmodernist and today masterwork of 1908 called The Lobster, which is now at the Amon Carter Museum. Conceived by the artist, the exhibit was run by the artist's wives, most notably Mrs. Anne Holden Mazanovich and Mrs. Mary Walpole Cragoff. Their unique efforts included wrestling promise pictures from artists, to painting the show, to planning and opening the reception, to offering daily afternoon teas, and creating a special Children's Day. The dedicated team transformed the oak-paneled library hall, occupying the entire second floor of the former library, into a Fifth Avenue-like gallery, complete with oriental carpets, potted palms, floral arrangements, and paisley wall coverings that complement the art. The first show featured 34 works by 18 artists, including paintings by only one woman, Tilly Springer Prisoner, who was known as the darling of the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts. She and her industrialist husband made Westport their summer residence from Philadelphia. It's impossible to find an image of her, and this painting is just one of the few that are online that were identified as being by Tilly. Throngs of local supporters, residents and visitors attended. Regional and national press made notice too. The Philadelphia Inquirer reviewed the show and spoke of the portraits by Tilly Springer that were being shown, as well as the painting created in Paris by Dove. Much like then, the Jessup Library was a cultural gathering place for residents, newcomers, and photographers. The other women artists that were exhibiting in these exhibitions that ran through 1917 were Laura Garden, who you see in the second row of images. And actually, she exhibited the Better Babies medallions shown here and on her easel in 1913. She had studied at the Art Students League under James Earl Fraser, and eventually by 1914 married him, and the couple began buying property in Westport along what is now Fraser Lane. Lillian Baer, who you see in the lower register of pictures, is the only Westport, who Westport knows today as Lillian Wadsworth of the Wadsworth Arboretum. She was a student of Fraser's as well, and toggled between Westport and her Madison Avenue apartment, where she lived with H.M. Baer, an artist, architect, and designer. Catherine S. Lawson, I have no examples of our work or a picture of her. But what I did find out through discussion of her husband's arson case, this is where you get on the nitty gritty, that she was a Shaw medalist at the National Academy of Design. So World War I resulted in huge changes to the nation, but also in Westport, and the population really did begin to grow and change. After the war, some artists left, some stayed, and newcomers arrived. As the town grew and modernized, Frederick Bedford adorned the town with the crown jewel, the Bedford House, for the Westport YMCA, the fire station. And it also held meeting and social rooms for the Women's Town Improvement Association, which was a forerunner of the Westport Women's Club. With the opening of the Y in 1923, and a major exhibition of 56 works of art was held, about 1/4 of those were by women. In 1928 to 31, the WTIA resumed one-person group shows. They were held 1 week at a time. You can see a sample schedule from 1930 here. And in 1928, the women's art was a focus, which is nice to know because of the Women's Association. The show, that year, the show returned to the Bedford House in 1928, and the Garden family, the mother, Alice Tilton Garden, her youngest daughter, Laura, and her sister, Lila Garden, who was shooting here in a World War I Red Cross uniform, were all artists and given a 3-person show. They were originally from, well, not originally, the family Tiltons grew up in Chicago and studied at the Art Institute of Chicago, and then moved to New York, and were and studied at the Art Students League, hence where Laura fell in love with James Earl Fraser. Alice Tilton was a fascinating, because she was the daughter of Theodore Tilton, the writer, and his wife had a scandalous affair in the national news, but she grew up with all kinds of luminaries, sitting in the laps of famous artists and poets. And in 1928, the second week of women's art was held. And that featured Dorothy Hope Smith, who was the creator of the Gerber Baby, Alice Harvey, who was a New Yorker cartoonist, and Nancy Fay, who we've already talked about a little bit here. And what's important about this group and this will be our transition to the WestPAC, is that women broke in here with this show. It was featuring women who really broke into male-dominated world of illustration and cartooning. And Alice Hardy, again, she has connections to Chicago, to the School of the Art Institute. She was, everything was a connection. She had friends with Helen Hodgkinson, was connected, who was really ran the New Yorker, and came forward with all kinds of opportunities. But in addition to these three women, Marion P. Waldron joined them, as did Rose P. Stokes, who was an activist, social leader, and one of the founders of the Connecticut Communist Party. So now I'm going to hand it over to Ive.
So I'm going to use this print, which is in the show, to transition from the era of the 1930s and bring us up to the 1960s, when the Westport Public Art Collections, or what's today known as the Westport Public Art Collections, begins to come together. So Marion Greenwood, the artist of this print, realized to some extent the globe-trotting lifestyle that Alice Hardy's character in the cartoon in the middle of the bottom can only dream of. She studied at the Art Studies League beginning at the age of 15. By 19, she had earned money from a commissioned portrait and travels to France. In her early 20s, she's working for 4 years on mural and fresco projects in Mexico, meeting the likes of Diego Rivera, and other muralists. Upon returning to the United States, she painted numerous murals for the New Deal's federal art project. And in the photo on the right, you can see her at work on a mural for a housing project in Brooklyn. And she says in interviews for the Archives of American Art that it always came back to needing to make a living as an artist. She says, it was always economic. I was always having to worry about how to make a living. I've had to make a living all my life. So I just had to quickly get on the mural projects that were happening. Another important source of income for this working professional artist was the prints like this one published by the Associated American Artists. She says they would pay artists a couple $100 to do lithographs, and then they would sell them in large editions at a very low price to people. So she says, so all that helped me to live. So you really get a sense in this interview of the way that she's really working to make her living as a professional artist. Even so, she says one of the most productive times in her life was during her 2-year stay in Asia, mainly in China and Hong Kong, but she also traveled throughout Asia. She says, I completely changed and loosened up, and it was, in fact, one of the best periods for me. And I got away from household chores and the horrible rat race in New York City and having to make a living, at least for a little bit, and did a vast amount of work. So you can also get a sense of the freedom that that time gave to her in this fighting work. So this print by Greenwood, completed in 1967, to my knowledge, she doesn't have any Westport connections beyond the fact that this print is in our collection, but she did study at the Art Students League with a number of the other women that Kathleen mentioned earlier. So this brings us up to the early history of the Westport Public Art Collections, specifically the school's collection, which is founded in 1964 by Bert Chernow, who's in the upper right here, when an inaugural exhibit is also held at the Greens Farms School. And the collections today, plural, is an umbrella for several groups of artworks, with the school collection, the Westport Town collection, as well as the Works Progress Administration collection that WestPAC cares for as well. And these are displayed across municipal buildings and schools, as well as outdoors in Westport. But 60 years ago, from 2024, so thinking ahead to next year, the school's collection was founded by Bert Chernow, who, for those who don't know him was a teacher at Greens Farms Elementary School, and later became the chairman of the art department at Housatonic Community College. So there are lots of connections between these different art institutions in the area. And the school's collection is still the largest of the collections under WestPAC's umbrella. Now, I want to stress today also the role of women as caretakers of the collection from its early days through today. If you look at the lists of the various committees and read through the archives on our Google Drive, you're constantly coming across the names of really active women who have been curating and researching and installing and caring for, conserving, cataloging, administrating the collection since the decades, since the 1960s. And so while I'm in no way minimizing the vision of Ruth Turnow in founding the school collection, making original works of art available to students in the schools every day, it's large part due to the work of women over the years that allows the collections to be enjoyed today by students, staff, town residents, and workers in town alike. And Carrie Weaver is among those people, and she was on the committee as well back in the day. Two other of those women are Molly Donovan and Eve Potts, who are seen at the lower right here in a photo from 1976 with one of the treasures of the WestPAC collection, a plastic molded relief by Tom Musselman. In 1974, so 10 years after its founding, the school's collection is reorganized under the PTA. And Sisters Eve Potts and Molly Donovan are appointed co-curators of that, which they will continue for decades. And I should say that Eve is still an active member of our committee today after a brief hiatus away from Westport. I personally did not have the honor of meeting Molly Donovan. I moved to Westport, I think the same year that she passed away. But there's not a day digging through those files that I don't come across her work and her name and her correspondence. And also to be noted are the efforts of women like Joan Miller, whose database keeping was foundational to our ability to provide the collection today online in Connecticut collections to the public. All right, well, I also wanted to briefly mention this work by Ruth Colder Dyer, which is in the exhibition downstairs. It was one of the early works included in the collections. She was originally from Scotland. She served in the British intelligence. She was stationed in Egypt, Italy, the Balkans. And after the war, she comes to the United States and studies art in Florida and then at the Silver Mine Guild, which is another name that's going to come up frequently in the discussion of women artists in the collection. She was primarily a sculptor. She discovered welding and she became really attracted to metal sculpture, and so that's what she's best known for, although there's little information that I have been able to dig up about her. But three of her works were shown in 1972 at Storm King with the likes of Louise Nevelson, Henry Moore, David Smith, and others. And in 1977, the National Commission on the Observance of International Women's Year, that's a name, appointed her to the Committee on the Rights and Responsibilities of Women, so she was also involved in activism for women. While we don't have any sculpture by Dyer in the collection, I wanted to mention another pioneering woman sculptor, Jean Woodham, whose work, The Pair, that you see here, was also in the original school collection assembled by Ruth Turnow and exhibited at Queen's Farm School in the reveal or preview or whatever you want to call it of the collection in 1964. You can see in the clipping in the middle. Woodham was originally from Alabama in the 1940s and 50s. She was exhibiting her sculpture in group shows with, again, Louise Nevelson, who would then sponsor her for membership in the Sculptors Guild, along with David Smith, Alexander Calder, Salman Lucci. In the early 50s, she moves to Fairfield County, to Norwalk first, and becomes the head of the sculpture program at Silvermine. She mastered welding, again, another commonality of Dyer, but she did not work from maquettes, models that were passed to fabricators. She did her own fabrication of quite large works. Especially in the 1960s, she began to focus on making large-scale public commissions. And Kathy told me an anecdote that I can relate about her. She visited women's studio. And she told her about how she would be working and her kids would come home with goggles and torches and whatever, you know, you use to weld sculpture. And she said that her kids at some point commented, "Mom, why can't you be like the other moms and just wear matching sweaters?" And girls. But with the proceeds from her commission, she bought a house in Westport and converted the garage to a very large studio, which was eventually expanded to 2 stories to accommodate some of these really large commissions that she bought. And this sculpture, the pair, is actually permanently on view in the Staples High School main office. So if you ever have a chance to go to the principal's office, you can see it there. So a few statistics on the representation of women in the collection. I should say very unscientific statistics. I kind of eyeball these. But in the 1975 list of the collection as it stood at that point, 28 of the 120 artists were women, and 38 out of 157 works were by women artists, so about 23–24%. And compared with today, grown a little bit, about 145 to 550 artists represented in the collection are women, and approximately 28% of the collection of over 1,800 works. Very unscientific, but gives you a sense that we're doing a little bit better than a lot of major institutions. And I should say, putting together, groupings, thematic exhibitions of works from the collection, it's not hard. We don't have to work to include works by women. It happens because there are so many really wonderful works to choose from when we do that. Also under the WestPAC umbrella is the Town of Westport collection, which had works from earlier, but also begins to really grow in the 1970s with the efforts of the Westport Bicentennial Arts Committee. Again, the majority of women, with Shirley Land as seems like a force of nature within that committee. They organized a loan exhibition, Westport Artists of the Past, with some 75 works loaned, installed in the Westport Public Library that Kathy mentioned earlier, and which was accompanied by a full catalog and reviewed in the New York Times, among other publications. More permanently for Westport, in 1976, a core group of works that 15 artists was selected from applications for the bicentennial celebration. And over half of these artists, 8 out of 15, were women. I don't know if that was by design or it just happened that way, but these works up here are among, and one of them, the Lucy Selleck painting, is in the show downstairs, that made up the bicentennial collection. And many of these are still on view in Town Hall in Westport, as well as across the sites and schools where we hang the artwork. Included Enid Monroe, from whom we have several, I think 6, I can't remember, works in the collection. Suzanne Lemieux, who was a painter, illustrator, and also a concept artist for Disney. Barbara Rothenberg, painter and collage artist. Diane Alexander, and others. So I want to briefly talk about some of the artists represented in the show downstairs, and then I'll hand it off to Kathy for several of the other artists. I don't think there's another artist as heavily involved and represented in the collection as Anne Charnow, perhaps male or female. This painting right here, Billboard, from circa 1976, was part of a public art project. So again, connecting to the creation of public artworks, of billboards that were installed throughout Bridgeport and other cities in Connecticut, reproducing paintings by artists. And this work by Anne Charnow was part of that project, currently hangs in Town Hall. And it relates to the work by Anne that's on display in the exhibition downstairs, Bell, Bird, and Candle, also from the early 1970s. So you can see this reoccurring character of a new woman, eyeless, with prominent kind of red hair and red lips, surrounded by or accompanied by a bird with multicolored dots and feathers and wings. And in watching this wonderful interview from Artists in Residences, kind of COVID project that is just really amazing to visit. I saw this small sculpture of a bird perched in her studio, so I would want to ask her about that. Also in the show downstairs is a self-portrait by Anne Chernow, which overlaps in both Fairfield's collection and Westport's collection, the same print, but ours is included in a portfolio called Translations, the reproductive print reinterpreted in the 21st century. And so Anne is here inspired by a portrait, self-portrait by Vigée Lebrun, a pioneering portraitist from the 1800s, 1700s, say 1800s, who worked in, well, in this case, she's painting in Russia. And, you know, some of what you can see her painting up there in the background actually reminds me of some other of Anne Chernow's prints in the collection that are with line work. So, an interesting synergy there. And she talks about, she writes in the portfolio that she was attracted to the work of Lebrun for the way that they convey an appealing sense of timeless feminine languor. Lebrun was admired for her skill as a colorist, her painterly surfaces, and her ability to render the luxurious fabrics of Sarah's costumes. I think we can see some of that same attention to accessory and costume and beauty in Anne's works. This is a series called the Star series from, again, the 1970s. Some of the only silk screens that she has done since she became allergic to the materials and never worked in this medium again. She notes that while she often begins with a comfortable image that offers a safe fantasy inspired by film noir of the 30s and 40s and the female movie stars that appear in those movies, she then alters the image, creating visual tension so that the image evolves into something unsettling. I'll show you here the close-up of the image of Hercules, which has a kind of embroidered collage brooch on it, and is inspired by Betty Davis in the movie Of Human Bondage, but again altered, shifted, the position is shifted to become something else entirely. I wanted to give Anne a few words, so I can play this and just listen to
This is Hercules. All 5 silk screens are named after movie stars who I admire. And they're named after stars in Germany. So she is Hercules, and it's a silk screen embossed. It's about 30 by 20 inches. It was done in 1976 as a commissioned group by a collector named Herbert Lust, whose wife Virginia Lust ran a gallery in Soho, and they had 5 of them on exhibition there with related drawings. She is based on Betty Davis, but I don't use the actual faces of the movie stars. I've never done that. I've just called in models who look like them or who feel like them. So I had Betty Davis visit here, and that inspired me to use her as one of the stars. No.
Yeah, leave it there. You can listen to the rest on the Senior Center project, where we have recordings of many artists speaking about their work on the Westport Senior Center's YouTube channel. The image that you see on the left was Anne Chernow's response in 1976 to the question, what is feminist art? Where a group of activists sent out invitations to artists across the country to respond to this prompt on an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper. And she submitted this drawing And then followed up in 2019, when this project was revived with a typewritten response, where she talks about her inspiration from film noir as a kind of feminist genre of movies. And she also talks about her 10 grandchildren, all girls, to whom she always speaks the truth about the world and how things are. And so it's a very interesting document. It's all accessible on those archives of American art. And then I'm about to turn it over to Kathy again, but I wanted to mention that, you know, Anne Chona has continued to be a champion for the collection, donating works. This is a portfolio, again, inspired, her print, her contribution inspired by Betty Davis, this time from the All About Eve movie. And this is from a portfolio called Wild Women, a solar etching portfolio that just came into the collection this year. Okay, I'll hand it over to Kathy again, and I'll be back in a second.
Yeah, so this was. So this is Lucy Salik's still life studio still life 4, number 4 from 1975. And this is a series of 14 paintings that she did exploring her studio space. And they were exhibited in Soho at a gallery that was formed by women artists for women artists. So they were about really supporting women artists in the 70s, which was a very difficult time for women to get a booking and to get representation. And she was living in New York City at that point. It's also about the art of painting with acrylics, and all of these are the tools that portrayed around the room. And if you think of other studio paintings in traditional ways, you usually have your easel and you have your models on the sills, and you have all the tools in the room, pieces of inspiration. But now here they are all flattened on the floor as she looks to and refers to them: a paintbrush, a book, a watercolor sketch, and a towel, her paint can, her putting her brushes. And it's a really wonderful self-portrait as much as it is a still life. She was really trying to push the boundaries of still life work. People would say, why aren't you doing a painting of oranges or of apples or of flowers? And to her, a still life could be something like this, that was a representation of her studio. So she also was very much wanting to work with objects that were close to home. It's a celebration of the familiar, of commonplace objects. She said that she created still lifes of the grocery bags spewed across the kitchen floor in the same way that she would do this, things that had personal resonance for her. So the resulting works, demonstrate how varied individual approaches and stylistic preferences come together to resolve in terms of a pictorial definition. In talking to her about this painting, we were doing, when Anne Covaci was doing the project at the Westport Center for Senior Activities, she talked about this painting also in terms of her move to Westport in the 1970s. And she was so afraid of losing her identity that she had as an artist in New York. She would now, so whenever she submitted works to galleries, she never wrote Lucy Salik, she wrote L. Salik. She tried to degenderize her name so that she wouldn't be judged by a different standard. And she said it was hard to make that true. position. Because she too is home raising her children, beautiful children, and happy to be doing it, but really wanted to have her career. And even to this day, she speaks about her art in a very, in terms of, you know, her professional career, not as a hobby or side work. The next painting, the next work of art that is in the exhibition is Ive Covaci's Drawn. And I've included here an installation photograph of the piece from 1996, which we just learned about. And we were in meeting at Nikki's house. And it puts this work in a completely different context to see it with the other pieces. And when you go to her studio, a number of these works are still in situ in her place. She donated this to the collection around 2000 when there was a major catalog done on Westport art collection. And in these pieces, she you know, she builds, she draws with her tools and her metals and her fibers. And you know, it becomes this dense three-dimensional drawing. A lot of times she'll have a counterpart of a physical drawing, a two-dimensional drawing that goes with it as well. And it really gives this sense of form and shape and depth. I'm sorry, I'm doing my glasses too. Sorry. In talking about these works, both in her drawings and in her sculpture, she considers herself as obsessive in building up the form, whatever labor intensity it means. This kind of, she's very proud even in her 80 years now of being very strong and being able to literally manipulate this medium. You know, in this intensiveness, she defines form and really the spontaneous impulse of automatic drawing is then channeled into repetitive, almost compulsive structural form. She very much thinks of herself as a feminist artist because she's not afraid of looking at shapes or having things that are gender neutral. And this entire series really just plays with different organic forms and shapes as well. It's just really a treat for her to see this work in this exhibition. And she regrets not being here tonight because she has another exhibition opening as well. So, okay.
Now turn to an art student with us tonight. Oh dear, that's summer. So these are works by Nina Bentley. The one on the right is on display in the exhibition downstairs. We also have this photograph in the Westport Public Art Collections, Protecting Americans' Values, which she has spoken about as one of her favorite shoots that she has done. And we now also have another photograph of the Van Gogh shoe that's downstairs. In addition to these, I wanted to show you a few more of her shoe sculptures that perhaps more directly relate to some of the themes of women and some issues around women that we see. These were on display at the Westport Art Center in 2014. And there's again a wonderful video tour that she gives up that exhibition. Where I was able to learn more about these shoes. So the one on the left is called Corporate Executive Female Climbing Shoe, which she has referred to as what was needed to get ahead in the corporate world if she were a woman. And she speaks about the sharp tips even having a few specks of blood on them. The one on the top called Feathering Her Own Nest, she is described as a breakthrough shoe. Indicating that a woman can take care of herself, can earn enough money, can support herself. Again, we're returning to some of the themes that I spoke about with Marion Greenwood when I started this selection. This piece right here is in the New Britain Museum of Art. Nina says that she's done about 100 shoe sculptures, several in multiple versions, but she also works in assemblage and in both small and large scale sculpture like this. This one is entitled Corporate Executive Life Service Award Bracelet. It's a large work, 42 by 42. And was inspired actually by the well-publicized divorce of Lorna and Gary Wendt. He was a former GE executive, and when they divorced, she was offered only a portion of his earnings, and she successfully, eventually received. She campaigned for her rightful due, and eventually received a much larger sum, and went on to found the Equality and Marriage Institute. So this piece was inspired by that case, and is in that permanent collection where Nina Dunn had a solo show. Right. And then lastly, bringing us up to most recent accessions, this is by Crystal Forrest called Don't Judge Me. It just came into our collection in 2021. She's an artist who has found a second career as artist after working in finance for 20 years. Formerly of Stanford, she now lives in San Diego, and she came to the attention of WestPAC through the Beachwood Arts organization's inaugural Amplify Festival in Westport that celebrated the voices of Black artists and performers and engaged in community conversations. Since entering this collection, the collection has been shown at MoCA and the Westport Idea exhibition and has been on display at Coleytown Middle School, where it is greatly appreciated by art teachers and students alike. Forrest has said that she was experimenting in these portraits with textures. She uses collage and these kind of textile patterns in the work. She has now turned to working mainly in oils, but continuing in the tradition of portraiture that she shows here. And she says that she loves diving into a subject and seeing the uniqueness of it, to challenge her work to develop a story and a feeling, rather than just making it look like a photograph. So WestPAC today has over 1,800 works of art, and as I mentioned, it's growing. These are some of our recent accessions, including a whole body of work by Lindsay Adario called The Elf Rebellion, photographs of Afghan women from a project she did in 2011. Print portfolios that have come to us via Ann Chernow, and more work by Lucy Stanek that has recently entered the collection. And a wonderful print by Elizabeth Catlett that was given to us by a former and now current again committee member, someone who was on the committee a long time ago and has reached on this. So in addition to our work with new accessions, we care for the collection. We are a committee of 24 women and 1 man currently, continuing that tradition. Installing and rotating the works throughout the municipal buildings and sites of Westport. So these are just some of the current women of WestPAC at work. And I think I will leave it there since our time is just about up. Maybe we have time for a few questions if you have them. Otherwise, thank you so much.
Any questions? Comments? Ideas?
It was great, it was just wonderful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I just want to say, if you want to maybe capture work that woven piece, there's an art show that's opening tonight at 6 o'clock at the barn at the Westport Country Playhouse.
Go there from here.
It's one of the 11 artists featured in that show, and she's got, I think, 5 pieces, and they're really great.
She also does a large scale public sculpture. We're looking at her for some projects in Westport, but just very inventive and full of life. the two of you have a similar kind of,
Well, we're friends.
yeah.
The show in Westport is being put on by the Artists Collective of Westport, and it's running tonight. Tomorrow it opens at 2 o'clock, and then it's open the next day too. So I think it's a 4-day show. But it's worth.
Is it in the barn or in the playhouse?
It's in the bar. It's right behind.
I think what's interesting, just across time is that there's always been this, I try not to use the word local artists, because I don't think that artists that we're speaking about here fall under that. These are nationally known artists who work for Westport, who have a home and studio here. And they're Westport-based artists, is how I like to refer to artists that practice in this area. Because it's very easy just to kind of say, oh, local artists, and I think that doesn't do service to those individuals that are women. And that's true historically as well. I think that being an artist in Westport, the other draw was really the proximity to New York. Being able to hop on a train, to be able to go to your galleries, to be able to, and now we're seeing that, the art world is definitely, it had moved at this point before, but there's more opportunity for artists to be represented within Connecticut as well. But that's always been a part. So people had and still have the New York studios. And he talks about trying to maintain that New York studio for a long time. And then it finally, she added on to her own home. And Nina has her own studio, kind of 100 yards or 50 yards from her main house. So having the ability to work from home, but in a dedicated space that is all about art making, I think it's really really special. Artists' homes and studios are cool.
Does Westport do any work with community schools other than the Westport Public Schools, or is that an area of interest for WestPAC?
Well, I'll take part of it, and then I'll let you take that. So one of the reasons we went to a digital online catalog, having that in public, is for people to know about our collection. And so having those digital resources for people, make it available for people to, like Phoebe, to go through this collection and see about different ones. We've had numerous works being lent because of that. But it also makes things available to get tied into the curriculum. What we don't have online are curriculum links and ties, but we know that that's a goal that we could eventually have, but it takes kind of specialized resources and ability to work both with the school district and other consortiums of teachers to be able to do that.
Yeah, as a committee, we haven't done any work specifically in schools outside of Westport. We have learning galleries in our schools, and we rotate the works throughout offices and such. But we have been trying to exhibit more works outside of the schools so that they're accessible to the broader public, which can include, school trips from other areas to see the collection. So we've had an ongoing every year exhibit. We've met on 2 at local Westport in January. We showcase works at the Westport Library as well from the collection. At the Westport Senior Center, we have a wall where we rotate works, as well as a wonderful permanent installation at the Senior Center. So we are trying to bring the collection more and more out into public spaces, because realizing people can't, Westport residents or non-Westport residents alike can't just go walking to the schools to see the art. Yeah.
And I think we're so overwhelmed with what we have that the concept of having any others is a bit daunting.
Or the other schools coming.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or logging or doing installations at other places, because then you have insurance and you don't have the, so every site has reps, and those reps are kind of, the eyes and ears of the community of those buildings. So once if you put things out in an environment that you don't know how to be good for, except in museums.
Which is so great to show our works in, in publicly accessible spaces. So I think it's
But actually, and you look at the, yeah, I showed I didn't know, pointed out that the floor plan of the line, that beautiful art gallery right downtown. I mean, it was gorgeous. Why don't we have a space like that anymore? Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.